back to Bites of Pi. This video will kickstart Lab 4F, Student Body Information. In this exercise, you'll create and implement the StudentInfo 4F class as described below. You'll also fill in the gaps in the runner class, Student Body 4F, that demonstrate the different features of your StudentInfo class. Note, there's an additional address for class provided that you will need to use, but you don't have to modify it or turn it in. So if we had to compare Lab 4F with the previous labs, you notice the last two labs we didn't give you any code. This one will give you a code and a framework for all three classes, the address class, the StudentInfo class, and the student body class. Now, just like it says up here, the address 4F class will have, but you won't have to modify it. The additional concept we're going to be covering with this lab is essentially encapsulation and overriding, the two new topics that we haven't covered yet in a lab. Now, you've been able to store primitives in objects like this, like strings and ints and doubles and booleans. But we really never created a custom class like this and then included the custom class as a member class. So here you can see in StudentInfo, I'm going to be storing the first name and last name, but I'm also going to be storing two objects, the home address and the school address of the student. And what we're also going to see in the actual runner class, we can share objects between classes. So I could have a ton of students that all share the same school address because they all go to the same school. That's something that's fairly simple to do, and you'll see this in the runner class. Now, the one thing that's confusing, that may be confusing with this, is the actual overloading the constructor out of the box. So you'll be able to create 3 new class variables that'll store the scores. You're going to be storing the score. Not only are you storing the name and the addresses of the student, but you'll need to add 3 new variables to store test scores. So we'll be adding new test scores in and getting the average of those. Out of the box, we notice that when you first create it here, we're going to be creating a StudentInfo class, adding the name. So first we add the address. First we had to create the address objects, and then we pass the address objects into the constructor for StudentInfo. We create the home address and school address for John, and we're passing those into the constructor for the student John. We're going to create the address for Marcia. Marcia lives in a different home than John, but she goes to the same school. So you notice how I've got a John home and a Marcia home address, but they all go to the same school, so I'm passing in school as that last parameter, and it's going to store that as their school parameters. The next steps in the runner class, you'll see getting score. We're going to use the set test score to force John to have scores of 85, 93, and 89, and then we're going to prompt the user using the get test score to input. So to overwrite what John's second test score was. Instead of 93, maybe something else, whatever the user adds in. The last thing that's the complex one is we have to call get test score or set test score to add the scores. So we create a student, we add their name and their addresses, but you notice we're not passing in the scores. They automatically get set in the instructions above. They get automatically set to 0. We're going to create an overloaded constructor that will do the same thing, but also pass in the score. So I don't have to call get score and set score to set the score for Jill. In one constructor, I'll be able to do this, and it'll look something like this. Jill. So I create a Jill home address for Jill, and I'll be able to pass Jill's name, first and last name, Jill's address, the school address like the other ones, and an additional 3 parameters. So you can see that I'm calling new StudentInfo 4F the first constructor without the scores for John and Marcia, but for Jill I have an additional 3 parameters. So essentially in the StudentInfo object, we actually have two constructors. I'm going to kind of buzz past. Here's the StudentInfo constructor without scores, and here's the same constructor with scores. Notice the name, so I'm just adding, it's the same inputs as the above, but we're adding 3 additional parameters. They're both constructors, they both have public student info 4F, but I'm overloading them by adding a different amount of parameters and different types. So because I have one constructor with 4 parameters and one constructor with 7 parameters, I can create the same object in student body, but passing in different additional parameters. So it saves me some time to have to set all these things up. Now, just like always, you want to validate that your output looks like the sample output here. So you want to make sure that you prompt the user. So let me see if I can run this here. So in the student body, I'll run this and see if I can't set this up. Three, 2, 1. So right off, I set the test scores, and I use the get test score to get the second test score, which is a 93. You see that? I set the third test score for Marcia to be 97, and that came out correctly. It printed out the home address and school address of each one of those users. And also, you notice at the bottom with Jill, I didn't have to do set test score because I used the overloaded function with the additional scores, and I printed them out: John, Marcia, and Jill. And that should conclude the video. Good luck!